Good morning and welcome to AARP's Caregivers in the Kitchen. I'm Ann Hales with AARP Alabama, and this is a cooking show that features experienced dietitians from Samford University, Chef Clara Darling and Mim Gaines. In addition to showing you how to create a delicious meal, they will also provide nutritional information that's beneficial to yourself or someone you may be caring for. This series highlights recipes that are especially good for caregivers who prepare meals for others. The meals are packed with nutrition and are generally easy to prepare. Many things today can even be made ahead or frozen. But really, these recipes are good for anyone who likes to eat good things. I encourage you to ask questions in the comments about the cooking or about nutritional needs that you may have or the person you're caring for may have. We will try to get to them during the segment or at the very end. I would want to remind everyone that AARP Alabama brings you a virtual program like this so we can have some fun, learn things, and stay safe during this pandemic. At the end of this cooking segment, please stay tuned because I'll show you a very short video that highlights some of our upcoming activities, like our weekly exercise segments. We also have gardening and art coming up. AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that empowers people to choose how they live as they age. AARP in Alabama has more than 420,000 members. AARP's role is to advocate on their behalf without regard to politics. And one of our biggest advocacy roles is to support family caregivers. The recipes and the ingredients list for today's menu were provided to those who registered for the program. But if you didn't register, you can still get those recipes. If you didn't register, what I'd like for you to do is to follow a link that we will put in the comments section. And when you follow the link, you can put in your email address so that we can send it to you. I'm also going to post a link to a survey. Please complete the survey to let us know how you like this program and let us know the other kinds of programming you would like to see. Now, I'd like to introduce the stars of our program. We have Chef Clara Darling, who will be cooking, and Mim Gaines, and also on the set is intern Katie Brasher. Good morning, Clara, Mim, and Katie.
Good morning. We're so glad to be here with you today.
I'm happy to have you. So I know today we're cooking a Mediterranean meal that everybody is going to love. I can't wait to do this. I cooked the things that we did on the last one. So anybody, if you missed the last one that we did in the fall, that show is on our Facebook and YouTube, on the AARP Alabama's Facebook and YouTube pages. You can always go back to those, find those. I will turn this, I say it's on the Facebook, it is on AARP's YouTube. Last time we did it on Zoom. This time we're doing it straight to Facebook. I will turn this over to Clara so we can get this show on the road. So take it away, Clara.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really happy to be here. As I'm sure Ann mentioned, I'm Clara Darling. I'm the Food Lab Director here at Samford University. And I'm so excited about this menu we have prepared today. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we've got some braised chicken thighs with eggplant served over a nice lemon herb couscous and then a traditional Greek salad on the side. So the reason we chose this, it's going to emphasize a lot of the Mediterranean diet that we talked about last time, some nutrition components there. And it's also going to incorporate some extra knife skills so I can demonstrate a few different pieces of produce you might not have broken down before, or maybe just show you some new ways of doing it. So to get started right away, because my chicken braise takes a while, I'm going to go ahead and get this on the stove. And then while that's cooking, I can go into the next one and talk about those from there. So I've got my chicken thighs here. When I go to put them down, I'm going to season them a little bit. So I've got some salt and pepper here, and I'm just going to lightly sprinkle it over. So I'm not getting too much, but enough to enhance the flavor of the chicken a little bit. Got some fresh ground black pepper as well. And these are bone-in chicken thighs, which is going to help hold on to some of that extra moisture and flavor. So I've got my pan already heated back here, just on medium-low. I'm going to make sure I get my oil in there first. It's already nice and hot, so I can go straight in with my chicken breast, make sure I move the oil around a little. And then, yeah, so as you can see here, I've got my chicken thighs in the camera. So I'm just gonna let those go for about 5 to 8 minutes. This will vary depending on your pan size, the type of material, the stove that you have. But in general, it'll take about 5 to 8 minutes. We're just looking for a nice golden brown color on there. Render down that skin a little bit. All right, so as that's cooking, I'll move into the next component of this dish, which is the eggplant and the shallots that go along with it. So I really love eggplant. I think it doesn't get enough credit. It's a beautiful vegetable. It has this really dark purple skin. It's got lots of phytonutrients and vitamins in it that are great for our function in our body. So what I like to do to start off with this is I'm just going to cut off the top and the bottom. And from there, I'm just going to give this a nice dice. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's going to braise down all into one little sauce, so you don't have to be perfect with this. The way I like to start is I'll stand it straight up and I'll cut down and get maybe a 1/2 inch down and just go into these panels, just like that. And that's going to allow me to have these nice stacks that I can then dice. So making them about the same size. And now I have these really nice flat spaces so I can stack my eggplant up from there. And I'm just going to do the same size cut the other way. All right. And then turn it one more time. So right now I have these little sticks and I just turn it one more time, and that's going to give me these nice even dices that'll help cook down evenly. What I love about eggplant is it has this really great kind of a natural MSG. If you've ever heard of MSG, it's a very savory, salty component of foods, and some foods actually have a natural amount of it in it. So Parmesan's a really common example, but eggplant actually has one of the highest amounts. So what that means is when you cook it down, when you braise it, especially in a liquid of some kind, it's going to give it a really nice, rich flavor. So I'm just going through, continuing with that same cut, cutting it into panels, then into sticks, and then into dices. All right. Once that's in, I'm going to come check on my chicken. Adjust my heat a little bit here. While that's going, all right, I'll get my eggplant out of the way and start working on the shallot. So the shallot is what we like to call a mixture between an onion and a garlic. So it's kind of a little red onion, but it has a rich garlicky flavor to it as well. You see it a lot in European cooking. It's got really nice depth of flavor to it. So we'll add that in place of onion or garlic in this recipe. So this is what a shallot looks like. Little onion. And so I would cut this just like I would an onion. So I'm going to start by cutting off the top and the bottom piece. So now I've kind of got my flat edges here. And then I'm just going to put it flat edge down and cut it right in half. So it's going to expose the layers of it, and it's going to allow me to peel that skin really easily. I can hear my chicken going back there. It sounds great. Sometimes the skin can be a little tough on these guys. There we go. So yeah, it looks like just like a mini onion. So I'll do that on both sides. Get my skin out of the way. All right.
Clara,
So just like an onion, I'm going to put this flat side down.
Clara, as you're doing the shallot, I just want to mention, as far as nutrition goes, that the eggplant has a lot of vitamins and nutrients that we don't stop to think about. In fact, eggplant even has vitamin C and potassium in it. So it's a great source of nutrients. And as Clara said, you can use it with the skin or without the skin. We prefer that you use the skin because those nutrients are so rich in that skin. And as Clara's working on the shallot, of course, it is in the onion family. And so it would have some of those great nutrients there too.
Yeah. All right, so now I'm cutting this shallot, and I'll show you what I just did. So I like to keep the end of it together, so I'm going to cut through almost all of the onion, but leave a little bit on at the end, or the shallot, I should say. So I'm taking the tip of my knife, going almost through to the end, and cutting these little, maybe 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch pieces. So you can kind of see I can break it up, but it's still held together at the end. And that's just going to give me a little bit more control over cutting these next pieces. So again, I turn it the other way. It's a very dicing and chopping, or it's just kind of the same motion over and over again. So once you get used to it, it becomes very easy. So it's already had these layers in it. So all I need are those 2 cuts, and it'll give you these nice, beautiful little pieces going to cook down in our braise. And when you get to the end of the onion that's all connected together, you can just turn that sideways and give it a little chop so it's in similar sizes to the other one. All right, and my chicken's just about there. So once it gets to the color I want, I will add in all of these shallots and the eggplant and the rest of my ingredients, and we're just going to let that braise. So for a braise, well, the great thing about that is we get a little bit of what we call dry heat cooking. So we're using that oil in the beginning to get some nice flavor on there. But then we're going to add some chicken stock and have it reduced down. And that moist heat cooking is using water-based things like stock or broth in a braise is going to allow us to have that really rich flavor, but with a little bit less calories. We don't need quite so much fat to transfer that heat. So this will cook down into that nice liquid that can then be put on top of our couscous and have that soak it up. So I can put my eggplant and the shallot in the same bowl. I'm going to add them in at the same time. So let's go over and check our chicken and see how it's going. Oh yeah, it sounds real nice. And I did put the lid on it just to keep it from getting too loud. I was having a hard time hearing, but that's not necessary. So I have some nice brown skin on top here. It's looking really beautiful. I don't know if y'all can see it. I will move it over here. So as you can see there, nice golden brown skin. I'm just going to give that another couple minutes on the other side, and then we'll add in all of our ingredients here. So one thing I want to talk about with this recipe, and with all of them, you'll notice a herb conversion rate on the bottom of all of the recipes. So I'm using a lot of fresh herbs. I love fresh herbs. They get a nice vibrancy to your dish, give some extra vitamins in there. It reduces the need for excessive salt use in it because it gives it some extra flavor. But a lot of people might not have access to fresh herbs. And a lot of times, even in the winter right now, it's hard to get herbs because it's so cold outside. The herbs don't grow as well. So you can always use dried herbs. And for that, I generally recommend about 1/3 of the amount. So for instance, if you're going to use a teaspoon of fresh thyme, I would use about 1/3 of a teaspoon of dried thyme because it's a much more concentrated flavor. So for this recipe, I just throw in some fresh thyme, which looks like this. It has these tiny little leaves. I love thyme. It gives a nice savoriness to it. But you can also use dried thyme. So this is what dried thyme would look like. It's just the leaves themselves dried up. And you can buy this at just about any grocery store, so that works perfectly well. So for any of these recipes, if you aren't able to get the fresh herbs, you can just substitute dried herbs and use 1/3 of the amount, and it'll work just as good. All right. So I've got my rosemary. Oh yeah, here's a lovely slide that we have. So these are the herbs that we're going to be using today. So parsley, thyme, oregano, rosemary, and dill. And they're fresh forms versus their dried forms. So you can kind of tell a difference. The dried ones will look a little less green, but otherwise the flavor is still there. The way that they dehydrate them, it holds in that flavor so they stay nice and fresh. Okay, so I've got all my other ingredients here. I'm going to go back to my chicken and just drop everything right in. Oh, pause for a question. That's a great question. So there's a couple ways to do it. Absolutely. I could go in here with a paper towel right now. I can show you what that would look like to do it. Or if you just want to cut it out from the beginning, take off the skin. Most of the fat from chickens, the way that their fat is distributed is right underneath that skin. So if you just take off the skin right before you cook, it eliminates all the need of it. Versus like some red meat, things like that will have fat dispersed without. It becomes more difficult, but that's really convenient with poultry, fish and duck and turkeys. You just take the skin off and it takes it away right there. So if that's personal preference. But if you wanted to dip some out now, what I could do, let's see if I have a little bowl I can use. I could just take this with my tongs and hold these back and just dip it right out.
Clara, as you're dipping that oil out, would you tell us why you selected to use olive oil instead of a canola oil or a...
Yes, I like to use olive oil because it has some extra health benefits that we really like. It's got some extra omega-3s in there, which we really like, versus the canola oils. Although they're plant-based, they do have omega-6s, but they don't have those omega-3s, which is what we want to get more of in our diet. So I try to go towards the olive oil when I can. Plus, with this type of food, this is Mediterranean-style menu, so olives are a very integral part of the Mediterranean diet and Mediterranean cuisine. We're going to use it again in the salad, so I actually like to have that flavor imparted on this dish as well. So we've got our fat taken off there. Turn this back on to about a medium low. So here I'll add all of the rest of my ingredients and just kind of dispersing them throughout, right around my chicken. I've got my fresh herbs. I'm just, with the stick still on, I'm throwing them right in there. I have some smoked paprika. This is one of my favorite spices. So paprika will give the nice reddish color, but having that smoked back note of it will give it just a little extra depth of earthiness and kind of some nice spice to it. So once I've got that, I'm going to add in my chicken stock. And I would recommend getting low sodium chicken stock if you buy it. We have some that we make in-house, which is even better because then we don't have any salt in it at all. But if you do buy it from the store, just make sure to get that low sodium version. It will cut back on the salt content a lot, and you won't miss it in the flavor. Okay, so I've got all my ingredients in there. I just have to sit this and let it do its thing. Braises like to go, for chicken, it's nice. It only takes about 30 minutes. For a beef braise or something like that, it's going to take a lot longer. So this is a good quick dish you can put together within an hour. Okay, so now that I've got my chicken on, the next thing I want to make sure I get going is my couscous. So I've got my water measured out here, 2 1/4 cups. I'm just going to get that boiling on the back. This is a really quick dish, which is why I like to use it. So all you have to do is boil the water, and once you add the grain, it'll just sit for 10 minutes and you're done. You don't have to worry about trying to set a timer or overcooking it or anything like that. So get the water going for that, and we will go ahead and work on our Greek salad. So I'm going to change out my trays here. So Greek salad is one of my favorite ones. I don't know many people that don't like a good Greek salad. It's bright, it's fresh, it has all these colors. It's got the vinegar that gives us this nice bright acidity. It's got fresh herbs, feta cheese in it. So it's really, really nice. So what we'll do for this is I'll get one big bowl. We're just going to cut all of our vegetables right into this bowl. So starting with the tomatoes, I use Roma tomatoes for this. This is a very classic Italian tomato. It has a little bit less seeds in it, a little bit more meat. It tends to come in these oblong shapes. So for this is a really big one. The recipe says to quarter it. If you like smaller pieces, you can cut it maybe into 8s instead. Some of them will come smaller, so you could quarter it from there. So I'll cut off the little tip of it. You don't necessarily have to, but I don't like to have that root piece in it. Okay, so I've got it here. I'm just literally going to cut it in long ways twice. So all the way down, and so I have my whole tomato, and then it breaks off into these 4 pieces. Okay, so you can leave it like that, but I find this tomato was so big, that's kind of a big piece for me to bite. So I'm just going to cut it in half one more time. So now I have these 2 big chunks. I do like to leave them in pretty big chunks though. So this dish works great. That holds for 5 to 7 days in the fridge. And the longer it sits, the more flavor it gets throughout it. So the vinegar and the olive oil and the seasonings will start to mix with the juices of the vegetables and bring those out a little more. If you have bigger chunks, it'll last longer. If you have really small pieces, the vinegar will start to break it down a little bit too much. So I like to have these big pieces so it'll last a long time and I can eat it all week long. So again, I'm cutting it in quarters long way, and then I'm just going to cut it in half once down the center of it. Then once we're done with our tomatoes, we'll move on into the cucumber. So Mim and I like to say, since we are in the South, for those of you in the South, this is very similar to a classic Southern dish where you just take Vidalia, onions, cucumber, and tomato, mix it with a little vinegar, salt, and pepper, and you're done. It was one of my favorite summer salads growing up. So this is just a little bit of a twist on that. For the cucumber, so I have a regular cucumber here, which has that thick skin with a little bit of wax on it. And different people prefer it different ways. Some people really don't like the skin, but there's a lot of great nutrition in the skin, some extra fiber, some that really bright color is there. So sometimes what I like to do to kind of get the best of both worlds is I will peel it halfway. So I get these nice little candy stripes in it. And what that does is it allows you to keep some of that skin on. So you get a little bit of crunch, a little bit of that extra nutrition, but it's not so much that you feel like you're chewing on it. Kind of breaks it up. Plus, it makes it look really nice. All right, so once I'm there, you can cut it in half. And these do have seeds in them. If you don't like the seeds, you can just take a spoon and scrape out the center with a spoon all the way down. I really don't mind the seeds. I find it's a nice burst of freshness when I bite into it, so I'm just going to leave them on there. So again, I'm going to take my cucumbers, turn them long ways, making sure my knife is always faced the same way. All right, and I'm going to go through and just cut it again into big chunks, about the same size as my tomatoes. Just going through, and I have all these nice half moon shapes that are going to go right in there. All right, and you can also use seedless cucumbers for this if you like that. They have thinner skin and smaller seeds, so those are an option as well. All right, so we've got our tomatoes and our cucumbers. Just real quick, I'm going to come glance at my chicken and make sure that everything's looking okay, see if I need to give it a stir. So if you can see it, I'll move it over. So it's starting to simmer here. It's looking really good. I'm just going to give it a stir to make sure that all of that eggplant gets down in the juices so it can cook evenly. Let's just go. All right, and it's boiling pretty hard, so I'm just going to turn down a bit. And, okay, I'm going to take a pause here. I'm trying to do all three at once to make this nice and concise. I have my water boiling for my couscous, right? So if you'll remember, I had 2 1/4 cup of water boiling, and I've got my salt and the olive oil. You can do 2 things. You can either add the salt to the water, but since I didn't do that, I'm going to actually add it right into the couscous. But what I like to do before I add the couscous to the water, I've got a little bit more of that olive oil here, nice omega-3s, nice flavor. And what that's going to do is help coat these grains with a little bit of oil so that they don't stick together, and it'll help give you a really nice fluffy product at the end and help give it just a little extra flavor. So I've just got a fork here. I'm mixing it around. And we do use whole grain couscous just because we like to work in those whole grains when we can. They've got some extra fiber, some extra vitamins in them. It's part of that Mediterranean diet. So now I've got these tossed. They kind of look like little wet bits of sand. So it's good to go. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off my boiling water, take my couscous, and just put it right in that water. I'll give it one little stir just to make sure it's dispersed. Put the lid on, and that's it. Let it sit for 10 minutes. It'll absorb that water, and we'll just fluff it with a fork and taste the deliciousness. All right, so that's our couscous going. We'll get back to our salad. So we've got our tomatoes and our cucumbers. The next vegetable I'm going to put in is a green bell pepper. You can use any color bell pepper you want. I really like the green ones particularly. I think I like the color and the flavor of it. So my trick with cutting bell peppers, my favorite way to do it, is to stand it straight up and cut it into 4 panels right off of those seeds that are in the middle. So we want to throw away the seeds. They kind of have some bitterness to them. They're not really appealing. So what I do is start with my knife right up at the top, and I'm going to cut right below the skin so that I'm actually severing the skin from the white. So you see the white part is still intact, and I have my skin here. And I just do that 3 more times, cutting as I go. I just turn it each time towards me and cut down. So now I have this whole seed pod just ready to go that I can throw right in the trash and not have to worry about it. I did have a little bit left on the bottom, so I'm going to save that part for my salad and cut off any of the white. So now that I've got these, it's really easy to dice it in there. Really, I just cut them into quarters so that they're these nice big chunks. Just like that, ready to go. There are definitely a few different ways you can cut peppers, so cut them whichever way you feel comfortable. That's just my favorite way. All right. And then the last vegetable to go in this is going to be our red onion. And this is the one I do tend to cut in smaller pieces just because a lot of people are adverse to large amounts of raw onion. I don't mind them, but if I'm cooking it for somebody else, I'll cut it a little smaller. So just like with my shallot, I'm cutting off the root ends and the tip that has all the extra paper, cutting it in half so that then I expose those layers and can peel that skin easily. So I'll go through, peel off that outer layer. Now, if you like big chunks of onion and you want to have that bite, you can just quarter this whole thing just like we did each piece of bell pepper and get that nice burst of onion in there. All right, so I want to have nice decorative arched slices in mine. So what I'm going to do is take it and just slice it right along this curve. All right. So while we're doing this, I'll give a couple tips on our knife skills. So as you see, I have these nice, beautiful, thin little pieces we can put on there. So you'll notice as I've been cooking, I have what's called a chef's knife. This is a 8 to 9 inch chef's knife. It's my favorite knife. I use it for the majority of the things that I cut. If you have a good chef's knife, you can pretty much do anything with it. There are some other knives you can use as well, though, if this is too big for you or you just prefer to have another knife. There are some other ones we can use. So I have my nice little wood block here. One of my other favorite knives, it's called a Santoku knife. It's a little bit shorter than a chef's knife and tends to have a more straight edge. And a lot of times it'll have divots in it. If we could put up that slide, I can show you. Yeah, so right there you see those little divots in it. And what that does is it helps the food release from the knife easier so it doesn't get stuck on there. But it's sometimes more manageable than the chef's knife. It's a little bit shorter. And I just love that. It's really great for just repetitive work. It's lighter so it doesn't hurt my wrist as much if I'm going for a really long time. The next knife down would be a utility knife, and you can get that with a straight edge or a serrated edge. This one here has a serrated edge. The one in the picture has a straight edge, and it's, again, just a little bit shorter, so it's a little bit easier to maneuver, especially if you're just starting out and you're trying to get comfortable with knife skills. But it's also great for just smaller work if you're, peeling things or cutting out the cores of something. And then the last one I like to mention is a paring knife, which is just a little bit smaller. Yep, it's in that picture there. It's about maybe the length of your middle finger, and it's really great for peeling, coring, mincing, things like that, that just require a little more precision. So all of these knives are great, but I always recommend if you're in the market for knives, trying to figure out what to get, invest in one good chef's knife first. Start there, and then you can move on from there because you can do most anything with the chef's knife, and you want a good quality one. All right, so then when I'm going to cut, I'm always making sure that I'm level with my cutting board and I'm trying to cut in this same angle the whole time. So I'm not chasing my food around, cutting like this. I'm always moving the food towards me so I'm in control and my arm is facing the same way every time. And then with my left hand or my non-dominant hand, I make what's called the claw. So I'm always tucking my fingers in a way. So I'm not holding my fingers out here where there's a chance of getting them cut. I've always got my nails, my little bit of nails, digging into the food, holding it in place and tucking my fingers away so that if anything happens, somebody bumped into me or I slipped or my cutting board moved, the most that's going to happen is I might take a little bit of skin off my knuckle, but I'm not going to do any real damage. So from there, I've got my claw, I've got my knife, and I just take it and I kind of put my tip side down and I go forward slightly. So I'm using that traction. So I'm not going straight down. I'm not doing that chop, 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 chop that you see in TV. I'm actually doing a little bit of a sawing motion, but just one smooth saw. So I'm not sitting here doing it like this. I've got just one motion over and over again. My tip goes back down every time. And this is going to allow me to get really precise, clean cuts. Yeah? Yes. Alrighty. Oh, yes. So mandolins are fantastic. It's one of my favorite tools. I do always caution, be careful with it. It's a very sharp blade. People hurt themselves on it all the time. But what a mandolin is, I don't have one with me, but it's basically a plastic panel about this big with a handle on one side. They make various sizes. My favorite one, if you're looking to buy one, is a Japanese style that's only about this big. It has one really sharp blade in the middle, but what's great about it is it has a mechanism underneath that allows you to get a precise size slice on something. So you have your blade here and then a panel here that can lower and lower. So if you want to cut really, really paper thin slices of radishes or any vegetables, all you have to do is just run the vegetable over it and it'll be a perfect cut every single time. So it's like a cheat way of getting a perfect knife cut. So I love it. And there's attachments you can put on it. So if you want to make what's called a julienne, which basically is little matchstick cuts, you can just run, say, a carrot over it with that tooth attachment, and it'll perfectly cut your sticks without you ever having to pick up your knife. And so it's really, really fantastic. So if you are interested in that, I highly recommend getting one. I use it all the time. So going back to my onion, do we have any other questions as we're going? Not yet? Great. Well, I'm loving these questions. All right. This guy. And one of my tools I really love, you'll see me use a lot whenever I'm getting things off my cutting board. I call it a bench scrape. Some people call it a dough cutter. But in order to preserve the blade of my knife, I don't want to be scraping it too much on my cutting board because it will start to dull it and de-align it. So I'll actually keep my bench scrape to the side. So then when I want to pick up a large amount of food, I have that to transfer it with. And certainly if you didn't want a whole onion in here, or sometimes it's hard to find a small red onion, you can use just half of one. All right, so I've got all my vegetables in here, ready to go. The last things we'll talk about are kind of the flavorings that go into this dish. So we'll have some olives that'll give a little saltiness, a little burst of juice in there. I just cut them in half. You can cut them in half any way you want. I do them short ways, so I have these nice little bits. But for that, I just take the olive and then I just cut it right in half. All right. But if you wanted to, some people like to cut it long ways. You can have it like that as well. So we'll put this in there. We've got some fresh herbs. So for this dish, I've got fresh oregano, which I love. It comes on a stick like this. It has these little bitty leaves on them. It has a nice fragrant taste to them. Very, very common in Italian and Mediterranean cooking. And then I've also got dill, which comes in big bundles like this. It has all these little very tender shoots coming off of it. So we've got a half tablespoon of each of these. And I'm going to rough chop them, but really rough. I'm just barely breaking them up. I like to have those nice visible pieces in there. It helps give some extra color. So just a couple cuts each way. Add that into the salad. And then our dressing or our marinade is really just olive oil and vinegar. I use red wine vinegar. You can use really any vinegar that you want, but I like the flavor that comes with red wine vinegar. All right, so I've got everything in here except for my feta. So I'm just going to give this a mix. And again, this is best if you do it a little bit ahead of time so that it can sit in the fridge and all the seasonings and vinegars and everything can mix together. So I will actually take I've got my salt and pepper over here, and I'm just going to give a little sprinkle. And this is not necessary. If you want to cut back on your sodium, you can leave this out. I like to just give a little bit to help bring out those natural flavors of the vegetables. Yes.
We have another question, and the question is about sharpening knives. How do you know when to sharpen them? Should you get them professionally sharpened? And would you repeat the question so that everyone can be sure to hear the question?
Oh, yes, good call. Okay, so the question was about sharpening knives. How do you know when to sharpen a knife? And how would you have that done? Would you have it professionally done or whatever? So a few notes on that. There are two different ways to quote unquote sharpen a knife. So, well, there's a few ways to sharpen a knife, but there's two different things that you have to do to keep up with your blade. So there is actual sharpening, which takes off metal from your knife, just a small amount, but it does take some off. So what that means is that your knife will incrementally get smaller as you go. So what that means is you don't want to sharpen, or you want to sharpen as least as possible. So one way to keep your knife fresh is to use what's called a honing steel, which I don't have one now, but I can show you how it would work. So a honing steel, you've probably seen it. It's a really long piece of metal. Sometimes it's kind of flat, sometimes it's perfectly round. But what that's meant to do is realign your blade. So as you're cutting and as you're scraping, that you get these little microscopic waves in your knife that cause it to feel like it's dull, even though it's not really dull. So every single time you go to your cutting board, ideally you would pick up that honing knife and you would take it and realign your blade. And you just run your blade along it on the angle of the blade. And you just do it maybe 5 times, but you want to do that every single day to keep up the blade. And that's going to allow you to not have to sharpen it as often. Now, when you do have to sharpen it, you'll know you need to because you're having trouble cutting through. If you hone it and you're still having trouble cutting any vegetables, you're feeling that resistance, it's, you can't cut through citrus or tomatoes, it's probably time to get your knife sharpened. So if you're unfamiliar with it, there are good professional services out there that do a wonderful job, but make sure that I would go to an actual knife professional, not necessarily a cooking store that has the ability to sharpen knives in the back. A lot of time that's not a trained professional. I would actually find a local knife shop and go to them, and they can sharpen your knives for you for a nominal fee, and that really helps keep it up. If you are cooking a lot and having to sharpen your knife a lot and want to save money, because it can get expensive sending it to a professional, you can buy a stone, so either a wet stone or an oil stone, and learn to actually sharpen it yourself through that. But that does take practice and consistency with it. So there's certainly ways that you can learn to do that. But if you're just trying to, be a home cook and get it sharpened a couple times a year, I would just take it to a professional. I think it's worth the fee. So I would recommend that they make handheld sharpeners you may have seen that you can keep at home and just run your knife through it. I don't generally recommend those because they take off a lot of metal, and that's why. But they do a fine job of sharpening. They just take off too much metal for me, and so my knives won't last as long. Is that a good? Okay. Yep, keep coming with the questions. I love the questions. All right, so now I've got my salad here going. The last thing I'm going to do just to make it ready is I have blocks of feta here. And you can certainly cut this or crumble it. I like to have big rustic pieces of feta in here. Again, it'll hold up nicely. It'll be about, the same consistency when I bite in as these big chunks of vegetables. So I'm just breaking it off into whatever size pieces I feel. Mix it in there. All right, so we'll just let this sit and marinate. And while that's going, we'll take a look back at our stove and see how our other dishes are doing. All right, so my
Clara,
chicken,
let
I'm
me
seeing
ask.
some steam come out. That's a good sign. Oh yeah, this smells wonderful.
Clara, can you hear me? Let me ask one question. How far ahead
I'll bring
can
this a little
you?
closer while we're waiting. So
How far ahead can
you
you?
reduce down here?
Oh,
Yes, ma'am.
how far ahead can you dress the salad, or so it doesn't get soggy? I guess that depends.
Honestly,
okay.
I think the salad still. Oh, I'm sorry. To repeat the question, they asked, how far ahead can you dress this salad? And this is a salad that I honestly will make 2, 3, 4 days in advance. So, if you're making it the day of, I would recommend giving it at least an hour to marinate. That would be enough time to meld together. But if you are trying to meal prep for the week and wondering, will it last? It will last throughout the week. You can make it Sunday and it will last until Friday. And I don't know that it will because it's going to be so good you're going to want to eat it all. But it'll start to get more and more juices as it sits, but those juices are really flavorful. So you just keep tossing the salad every day to make sure that the juices are redistributed, but it'll last for a long time.
And we have another question, Clara.
Okay.
The question is about the olive oil. And are you using the same olive oil for cooking as you do for the salads, or do you use a different olive oil?
That's a great question. There's a lot of discussion around types of olive oils. I use the same one. I use extra virgin olive oil for all of my purposes, unless I'm going to cook with an ultra high heat, such as grilling or something like that, where that I'm not going to add water to it. And that's just because olive oil does have a lower smoke point, which is why a lot of chefs and other individuals will suggest cooking with either a processed olive oil, so not extra virgin, or a canola oil or vegetable oil, because they have a higher smoke point. So what that means is that they can just get hotter before they start to smoke and take on some negative flavors. And if oil smokes if it goes for too long at a really high heat, it can become rancid and actually be detrimental to our health. So there's some concern about that. With the level of cooking I'm doing here, that oil is not cooking for long enough for it to get to that state. And I really want that flavor in there, and I don't notice any negative tendencies. But if you are more comfortable, or if you don't have olive oil, you can certainly use any oil that you have available. And then I definitely use extra virgin for my salads because I'm going to get those omega-3 benefits. I will say, if you're cooking with it, you're going to lose some of the nutritional benefits of the oil, because once we heat it up, some of those omegas start to fade out. But for anything raw, they're really going to stay pristine, and you're going to get that extra flavor. If you get olive oil that's not extra virgin, it's going to lose a lot of that olive flavor, and it's going to taste just like any other vegetable oil. So if you want that flavor in there, you're really going to have to get an extra virgin. The colors of the oils. Yep, so the extra virgin olive oil will be a darker, richer green color. It'll actually look like it came from an olive. The more they process it to make it higher, to have a higher smoke point, it's going to get more of a yellowish color. So if you have that darker green color, that's probably going to be an extra virgin olive oil. Does that make sense? Great. All right, so you may have noticed I took off the lid of my chicken. So at the end, once the chicken is getting tender and fully cooked, chicken does need to cook to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, but the amount of time that I'm cooking it, it's getting far beyond that. I don't have to worry about that. So once I know that it's nice and tender and where I want it, I'm going to take the lid off to reduce those juices down, just to get a little bit more of a concentrated sauce. If you wanted it to be a little bit looser, you could reduce it less. If you wanted it to be thicker, you could just reduce it more. I'm going to let it reduce for about 8 to 10 minutes until I get the consistency that I want. So then yes, ma'am. Oh, yes. Good question. So there's some tricks out there. One of my favorite chefs, his book, he says, if it smells like crayons, it's rancid. But I find a lot of people have a hard time distinguishing once they think about crayons, and all of the oil smells like crayons, and they get nervous about it. But it will have definitely a different effect. So if you have a fresh bottle of olive oil and you smelled it, and you have one that's open a while, you can smell them to compare, which might make it easier. But rancid oils will get a stale, kind of cardboardy, crayon-y smell to them, and it'll get more and more intense as they go. So if you open it and you smell it and it does not smell like the oil is supposed to, but it has an odor to it that kind of makes you go, that smells stale, it's probably rancid. It's probably not any good. The longer that they sit on the shelf, and the more heat, the more light, and the more oxygen that they're exposed to, the quicker they will become rancid. So in order to eliminate that, one of the ways is to make sure that you're buying oil that's in a dark container, so not a clear container. Get olive oil that's in like a dark green one that's colored like that. Keep it in a cool, dark place, so in a cabinet away from the stove or the oven, not above it where that could get that heat coming off. Keep it somewhere else in a cool, dark, dry place. And that's going to help extend the life of your oils. But just give them a smell. Make sure that they still smell fresh, that there's not a really musty odor coming off of it. And if it is, I would just buy a new bottle. Yeah, I could talk about oils all day long. There's a million different oils out there. There's so many. You can get a lot of great flavors from it for each different type of cuisine. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to cut, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, and then we can start finishing up our plating. I have a few herbs that I'm also going to add to my couscous. Remember, I mentioned there's lots of fresh herbs in this. So you can put any herbs you want in this couscous: parsley, thyme, rosemary, mint, whatever you have on hand, whatever you have available. I happen to have some leftover chives and mint from one of my classes, and I've also got some rosemary here. So it's about 1/4 cup. I'm just going to go through and slice these chives. Chives are like really tiny green onions. If you couldn't get herbs, you could even use some scallions or green onions as the herb in there, just to give it a little extra pop. And I love to have a little mint in here. Mint gives some extra little freshness to the dish. So I've got all my mint leaves here. And again, this is just a rough chop. I want to be able to see some greenery in my couscous. All right. And then I'll get just a touch of this rosemary here. Rosemary you don't need much of. It's a pretty strong herb, especially fresh. So we'll get just a touch. So I've got about a 1/4 cup just mixed here. Now we'll show the magic of couscous. So this has been sitting for at least 10 minutes back there. I'm going to take my fork again. So you can see it's this nice fluffiness. You know what, I might actually come over to this camera. It might be easier for you to see. There we go. So with this, if you just fluff it with your fork, just very gently, it'll come up, and it's like really tiny grain pieces almost. So I'm just going to loosen those up with my fork. And then add that here to my bowl, just kind of fluffing as I go. Oh, it smells so good. All right. And then to give this a little extra pop, I like to do this while it's warm, is add a little dash of fresh lemon juice to it. You could even, if you want it to be really lemony, you could add a little fresh lemon zest to it as well. So I've got 2 tablespoons of lemon juice here. And why I like to do it while it's warm is that the grains are more likely to absorb and draw in that lemon juice and really soak it into those grains. So I'll give it a little toss. Now that my lemon juice is distributed, I'm going to take these herbs, toss those in. And the warmth of the couscous will again start to release the compounds in the herbs that make them smell so good. So it'll give it a little extra flavor burst. But couscous does hold well. So even once you cool it down, this is another one that you can make a few days in advance and have it for a meal prep, or even freeze it if you needed to. You could freeze this with the chicken and the eggplant part, and it would hold as well. I would not recommend freezing the salad, but it can hold in the refrigerator. Okay, so I think we're all done. My chicken looks nice and reduced over here. I've got a little bit of sauce, not too much. And these big pieces of herbs, the rosemary and thyme, I can just stick right out of there. All right. We've got our nice little place setting here that we'll get set up.
With a delicious meal that she's just prepared. Just a few nutrition facts about the meal that she has been preparing for us today. As she's already said, Mediterranean is very high in some nutrients that we are always encouraging as dietitians. The couscous that she's serving, one of the most important things about it is it's high in selenium, and that's a mineral we don't really talk that much about. But the important part of selenium is that it is great for your immune system. This meal is packed full of antioxidants. And as you know, the flu season is in January and February. And as we are also dealing with COVID, we want our immune system to be very strong. So this meal packed with selenium, packed with the vitamin A, C, E, and as Clara mentioned, those omega fatty acids. She did use the olives in the cooking, and a lot of times a person who's trying to watch their heart healthy diet may want to be careful with olives because they are packed with sodium. However, as you'll notice, she used very little salt anywhere else. So that balance of using the herbs instead of salt will allow you to enjoy 1 or 2 of those yummy olives. You'll also notice she used the black olive or the dark olive instead of the green. And there again, that's just a texture and flavor preference. Nutritionally, they're very similar. So as she is plating this, you'll see what an appetizing meal packed full of nutrients, ready to go within a very short time of preparation. Any other questions today?
Well,
We'll
ladies,
see.
I would like to
Okay.
thank you for doing this, and there was another slide that I wanted to show that you have about the Mediterranean diet. So I'm going to put that up so you can tell us a little bit about that, because we hear about the Mediterranean diet a lot these days, and its healthy benefits. So I will put that up.
Thanks, Anne. And you know, a lot of people are interested in the Mediterranean diet. And if you are in a restaurant and you see olive oil, sometimes in the South especially, you might see people just dipping their bread in olive oil, and then they've claimed to have a Mediterranean diet. That's not exactly a Mediterranean diet. So this diagram shows you that the basis of a Mediterranean diet is a lot of the legumes, the beans, the seeds. That couscous would fall right in there with that. Then the next important thing would be your vegetables and fruit. You see a lot of those fresh, beautiful colors, the greens, the golds, the yellows, the reds. The Mediterranean diet touts a lot about different colors. And today we saw purple used. Each vegetable with a different color represents a different antioxidant, a different nutrient makeup. So that's why we're always saying, eat your rainbow, eat all the different colors. And this meal definitely had it. If you look up that chart, you'll see that the meat is smaller and smaller. Of course, the seafood, eating that a few times a week. And if you're thinking about the different kinds of seafood, it's not just salmon that we hear so much about, but we want you to eat a variety of seafood, eating the small ones, even trying some sardines instead of tuna all the time would be a great way to slip in more seafood. And then it's at the top, meaning you don't eat much at all, is your red meat, your sugars, your sweets. And that's the important part, is that this meal is this lifestyle, very centered around eating at the table together, enjoying the meal, slowing down, tasting the food, and then you are enjoying all these different colors, all these different fruits and vegetables. Of course, along with the Mediterranean diet is a lifestyle, and exercise is important in that too. So it is being physically active, walking more, parking a little further from the store, or making yourself walk the further distance. But that Mediterranean diet is a lifestyle that is wonderful for not only heart health, but cancer prevention and just health in general. Clara, would you like to add anything else about a Mediterranean diet?
Not necessarily about the Mediterranean diet, but I did have one more question. Somebody asked about the chicken, so I might take a moment to answer that. Somebody asked about the skin of the chicken and what the texture was. Actually, we had a couple people ask, would that taste good? Would it feel good? So the skin of this, it's not going to be crispy like when we initially browned it, right? It would come off really crispy. But the braising technique that we use, cooking it down really low for a longer period of time, is going to break down that skin. So it's not going to be chewy. It's going to melt in your mouth just as you're eating it. But again, if you didn't like that texture, or if you wanted to take the skin out altogether, reduce that fat the saturated fat and calorie intake, you could just take off the skin to start with. But I find I really enjoy the texture because it just kind of gives a melt in your mouth feel when you eat it.
Clara, as you're talking about those great feels in your mouth, a good, interesting question was about eggplant. And it does have a different texture to it. But the question exactly is, how do you choose an eggplant? And what do you do with an eggplant other than what you've shown us? I know in the South, we fry it a lot. And that's not exactly what we're recommending here.
Yeah, so the eggplant, I guess I'll repeat the question just in case, talking about how do I pick an eggplant. So that's a great question. There are a lot of different eggplants out there. I used a large Italian style eggplant today, which is probably the most common one that you'll see. So when I'm looking for that one, I'm first off looking for the color, making sure that it's got a dark purple color all the way around it, not too many spots, but I'm also feeling it and making sure that it feels firm. So as it sits out with a lot of our produce, the water that's in the cells of those fruits and vegetables start to evaporate, and that's what causes them to get soft and wrinkly. So the same will happen with eggplant. As it sits for a very long time, the water will start to escape and it'll get some wrinkly spots. You may push on it and you may feel it give a little. So you want to make sure that you're not getting those. You're getting them only when they're nice and mostly firm and mostly solid in that purple color. Now, if you're getting an eggplant like a Japanese eggplant or one that's supposed to have white stripes in it, sometimes you can find organic ones that are purple and white. That's going to be different, but all of them, you're going to want that firm touch to them.
Great, Clara. Another question has come up, and it was about actually, can you use a chicken breast instead of the chicken thigh?
Absolutely. You can certainly use a chicken breast instead of a chicken thigh. I tend to go to the chicken thighs as a personal preference. So chicken thighs, because they're a muscle that the chickens actually use versus the chicken breasts are muscles that they don't use. That's why they're white meat. That dark meat comes from ones they use. And that dark meat is from extra blood and B vitamins pumping through them. So they have a little bit higher B vitamin content. But the main reason I like them is they hold their moisture better. So they hold that they have a tendency to not dry out like sometimes chicken breasts do. And they're thinner, so they cook quicker, more evenly. But a lot of people prefer chicken breasts, and you can do this exact same thing with a chicken breast, no problem at all. It's just going to have a slightly different texture.
I've got to tell you, I sure wish that you were in my house right now and not an hour away in Birmingham, because I'm in Montgomery.
Do you have any other questions?
I would eat that.
There is one more question, and you're right, Anne, this meal looks delicious. But the one question was, and I think it's because I mentioned sardines, the question is, how do you choose a healthy sardine? Well, you know, sardines are packed in oil and they do come in a can. Personal confession, I don't eat sardines very often. The reason I'm making that comment is that you want to eat small fish as well as big fish to keep the fish balance. And so thinking of smaller fish would be a good idea. When I do pick sardines, I do look at the sodium content of it and the type of oil that it is packed in. I'm not sure that there's a healthier sardine than another. Clara, comments on sardines?
I would say exactly what you said. Look at the sodium content and look at the type of oil. Or I like to get them either, sometimes they can be packed in water. So if you're watching your fat content, you can get them packed in water. If you get them packed in oil, I would recommend getting that extra virgin olive oil. But I do use anchovies probably more than sardines, but I like them both because they're so small. They actually have the bones in them. So they're great sources of calcium, great sources of those omega-3s, and you don't need a lot. So if I use that, sometimes I'll use it in place of my salt because it has salt in it. So that'll help give flavor to my dish, but that way I don't oversalt it if I use both. But it does have some good components to it.
Well, Anne, it's at the top of the hour. So unless there's another question, we're turning it over to you. Thanks for having us here today.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. And everybody, before you leave, please look at the links that we have in the chat or in the comments, because we really would like you to take the survey. Let us know what you thought about this episode. Please excuse any camera work from my end as we're switching from one scene to another. But and we will have that worked out. We will have another episode in April. Watch for that. And if you didn't see all of this and want to watch it again, or you just want to watch it again and go through it, you can. Just go to AARP Alabama's Facebook page or our YouTube channel. You'll also find many other cooking episodes and exercise episodes and things like that. I do want to end with a very short video. Very short. I think it's less than a minute, that highlights our upcoming things that we have going on in AARP Alabama. And again, thank you. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we will see you next time in April.